She didn't just say it, she broadcasted it. Loud enough for her colleagues to hear, for the laughter to land, for the sting to settle in my chest like a quietly lodged piece of shrapnel. Don't be clingy. People might think we're actually a couple. The sentence wasn't a joke. It was a scalpel, slipped between my ribs while she smiled at the catering manager and walked on ahead like I was the hired help who overstepped. No introduction. No name. Not even a glance back. I stood there for a moment, still holding her weekend bag, like a damn bellhop. There was a pause in my chest, then a small, practiced exhale. I let the bag drop gently to the gravel path. Walked the opposite direction. Out past the fire pit. Down the stone path lined with overly sculpted boxwoods. Out toward the lake. It was a sprawling estate. Over 40 acres of manicured real estate. Old money taste with new money lighting. I'd seen it before. Too many times, actually. The property used to belong to a subsidiary. They kept it quiet after the restructuring. But I recognized the hedge curve and the slope of the back lawn from the aerial shots during due diligence. Everything they thought was theirs was built on handshakes and signatures I once gave away without asking for credit. I liked it that way. Legacy didn't need a nameplate. But disrespect? That had a scent. And it followed her like overpriced perfume. I stood under an oak tree near the edge of the water, watching her mingle back near the champagne station. That fake, effortless grace. That laugh she used when she wanted attention without commitment. She was in her element. Young, magnetic, dangerous to anyone stupid enough to think she valued people the way she valued impressions. Then I saw him. Her boss. Tan face, slick posture, that post-private equity glow of someone who hadn't been told no in 5 years. He stepped out onto the balcony above me, a drink in one hand, his phone in the other. He scanned the lawn like a lion looking for a waiter. Then his eyes landed on me and froze. His shoulders stiffened. The phone slowly lowered to his side. His mouth parted, like he was about to say something, but no sound came out. I nodded once. Nothing dramatic. Just polite acknowledgement. Like a ghost tipping his hat to a man who remembered where the bodies were buried. He didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just turned, fast, and darted back inside. I didn't move. I didn't have to. Oh, and before we go further, over 90% of people listening to this story aren't subscribed. If you're one of them, and you're liking how this is unfolding, a quick tap on the subscribe button helps us keep telling stories that don't hold back. It really motivates our whole team. Back to the story. I walked around to the other side of the estate and leaned against the fence near the helipad. The breeze was cool, a reminder that even in opulence, nature has its own tempo. That's the thing about these retreats. They think they're about bonding. They're about pecking orders. And the moment her boss laid eyes on me, something cracked in his. The oak leaf on the gravel behind me rustled. Voices shifted from laughter to murmurs inside. Whatever was coming next, I didn't need to say a word. Inside the estate's main lodge, she floated like she owned the oxygen. Glass of Prosecco in one hand, wrist draped effortlessly across the arm of a senior manager she was grooming to replace, smile like she was in a photo shoot no one else was invited to. She had the kind of charm that walked the line between strategic and sociopathic, knew when to laugh, when to tilt her head, when to brush an elbow just enough to blur a boundary. It had always worked for her, at least until now. She was completely unaware that 30 feet away, behind a smoked glass door in the drawing room, the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. "I'm sorry," her boss said to one of the older board members, pulling him out of a casual chat about venture rollouts. "That man by the tree. Do you know who that is?" The board member, Michael, gray suit, perpetually unimpressed, squinted through the window. "Which man?" "That one." Leaning against the railing. He was with her. Michael's eyes narrowed. He pulled out his phone. A few taps. A pause breath. A glance at another man, seated by the fireplace. The other man leaned forward, stared at the screen, then at me. His face drained so quickly you'd think someone had turned off the blood flow. "You're sure that's him?" he asked. The boss didn't answer. He was too busy already staring at me again, like someone who'd just realized they'd parked their yacht in a shark nursery. The problem wasn't that I was there. The problem was how I was there. Invisible. Not announced. Not acknowledged. Not part of their planning decks or invite list. Just present. Silent. Observing. "He's not on the partner roster," another board member whispered, stepping into the huddle now forming near the coat room. "He hasn't been in the press since, God, what, 14? Try never," someone else added. "He ghosted after the Insight Tech buyout. Walked away mid-deal. Refused the equity. Said he had enough. Yeah, and 2 weeks later, The FTC greenlit the merger without a single antitrust probe. Who do you think greased that? Outside, I shifted position slightly. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to let the wind move through my jacket. A worn barber she once mocked for looking too low-end. I liked it. It didn't scream anything. And the pockets had history. She brought him here. The boss muttered under his breath. And introduced him like that? He didn't even say the words. But they all knew what he meant. As if he was nothing. The idea wasn't just offensive, it was terrifying. Because if I was who they now suspected I was, and she had the gall to treat me like her weekend plaything, then she was either wildly arrogant or dangerously ignorant. Neither trait was exactly boardroom-friendly. And yet there she was, laughing by the charcuterie spread, taking selfies with a director for marketing, never once turning to see the growing whisper spiral curling like smoke behind the library doors. It was like watching someone sip wine in a burning room. With no clue the walls were already beginning to melt. Her assistant passed by, offering her a printed agenda for the upcoming Saturday morning strategy session. She rolled her eyes, barely glancing at it. "I'm not doing that deck unless James helps with the numbers," she said, referring to a junior VP who worshipped her. "I'm here to network, not babysit spreadsheets." Someone behind the curtain heard that too. Someone who had already begun flipping back through archived emails. Past deal memos. The cross-referenced initials. The patterns that matched with pseudonyms on off-record advisory contributions. The name whispered earlier? It wasn't a name that showed up on LinkedIn. It was the name attached to a foundation that quietly funneled seed capital into half a dozen firms, including the one whose estate they were standing in right now. And she was still working the room like a TEDx talk in heels. Glowing, effortless, unaware. But her name had just started sliding into the board's mental compliance ledger, under the heading of due diligence failure. And once that column starts filling, no amount of charm can clear it. During the 2008 crash, while most were clawing their way out of leveraged debt and praying banks didn't tighten the noose, I was sitting across from 3 failing logistics firms, each of them bleeding money, leadership, and direction. I didn't offer them a lifeline. I offered them structure, silence, anonymity, and one condition: no press, no credit, and no noise. The kind of agreement where my name stayed buried 6 levels deep in internal documentation, pseudonyms, proxy firms, third-party signatures. I wasn't interested in spotlight deals. I was interested in leverage that could wait. The first company, Hallbrook Freight, was a mess, tangled in regional contracts and idiotic warehousing strategies. I cleaned house, repurposed their routes, and folded them under a blind holding group. Years later, that same group quietly bought this estate as part of an executive hospitality expansion. She'd bragged about the retreat destination like it was some luxury secret. I already had the blueprints in an old archive folder. The second company? Dominion Transit. Her boss's current employer. He'd once pitched a failed pivot into last-mile services before I corrected their vertical approach and brought in 2 board members with direct ties to federal infrastructure advisors. He never saw my hand, but I made sure his corner office had reinforced walls, because without me, there wouldn't have been an office. The third, my crown jewel, controls one of the most quietly aggressive licensing portfolios on Earth. A single proprietary scan algorithm we secured back in 2011 now filters through 3 global customs networks, 5 pharmaceutical pipelines, and 80% of maritime import ledgers. That one, I keep especially close. It's why the right people nod when they see me, and the wrong ones never even know they lost. She never asked. Never wondered why I knew too much about internal politics or quarterly ghostwrite tactics. Never noticed when I redirected her naive board pitch to avoid a trap clause in a compliance protocol. She thought I was just observant, just curious. She once joked that I gave off-brand billionaire vibes. I played it off, but the people inside that house, they knew, or rather, they remembered. Michael, the board member who'd seen me from the window earlier, was now quietly reviewing a scanned printout. Not on a phone, on paper, secure, offline, passed to him in a folder by one of the partners who used to run finance at Hallbrook. He didn't say much, just looked at the name, the real one, the one that doesn't show up in company press kits, and then at the estate walls. "I thought he retired," someone said quietly. Michael didn't answer, but his eyes flicked toward the woman standing by the wine bar, now arguing gently with the event planner about the Sunday brunch seating arrangement. "She brought him here," he murmured. "She dismissed him here," another corrected. And that was the thing. It wasn't just that I was once important. It was that I still am, in ways that don't rely on LinkedIn titles or magazine covers. Influence isn't noise. It's infrastructure. And when you are the pipeline, you don't have to shout. She spent months trying to catch their eye. Revised decks, rehearsed pitches, polished branding with all the flavor of a startup MBA bootcamp. I'd seen it all. Hell, I'd funded better. And every time she mentioned wanting to connect more deeply with the board, I gave her space. Watched her try to turn charm into clout. Watched her fake fluency in a language she didn't even know had grammar. Meanwhile, the very room she was standing in, the lighting system was installed during the estate's renovation, which I approved. The furniture contracts? One of my quieter side ventures, reclaimed wood sourced from the decommissioned rail lines I helped salvage in 2010. Every corner of this place hummed with reminders of decisions I made. She just couldn't hear it. Yet, because arrogance is loud, but legacy? Legacy doesn't need to raise its voice. They say ego blinds you before it drowns you. And she was still dancing on the shore, completely unaware the tide had turned. She was laughing with one of the creative directors near the Prosecco station, biting into a fig crostini like she'd just sealed her next promotion with a wink and a well-timed anecdote about managing difficult personalities. Her stilettos didn't sink in the grass. Her posture screamed practiced elegance. She didn't even glance over her shoulder. Not once. Until he touched her elbow. It wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. Enough to make her blink mid-sentence. The CEO's face wasn't angry. It was worse. Tight, pale, drawn with a kind of internal pressure she didn't recognize yet. "Walk with me," he said. She followed him, confused, the nervous smile starting to flicker around the edges. Maybe she thought he was going to compliment her presentation prep or suggest some last-minute insight she could use in the strategy huddle. Her shoulders were still squared, hips swinging just enough to play confident. Then, near the catering tent, he stopped walking. Didn't even turn to her at first. Just exhaled. Then finally, "Do you realize who you just embarrassed in front of the board?" The words landed like a slap. Not because of the tone, because of the cold. It was clinical. No room for misinterpretation. She blinked. "Excuse me." He pointed. Through the tent's gap, past the bar staff, out toward the railing where I stood sipping water like someone who didn't need a damn thing from anyone here. "That man," the CEO said, voice low but clipped. "He is the reason our third-quarter crisis never made the papers. He was the one who structured the advisory exit from the Abraxas audit. He made 2 phone calls that rewired half our back end without alerting compliance. And you just introduced him like some forgettable side piece. Then mocked him." Her mouth parted slightly. "He never said. He didn't have to." The CEO cut in, finally turning to look her in the eyes. "We said it for him. Years ago. Every time we signed something clean. Every time we didn't end up on the cover of Fortune for all the wrong reasons." She swallowed. "He told me he was just consulting," she whispered. The CEO's laugh was sharp, humorless. "He is. Which should scare you even more. Because that means he's not obligated to tell you anything. And yet he walked in here with you. You brought him. And you what? Treated him like an intern who carried your sunscreen." She opened her mouth, closed it again, because she didn't have a script for this. All her little moves, the social manipulation, the performative charm, the slight passive digs she used to chip away at a man's confidence before positioning herself as the competent one, it all collapsed in the face of one glaring realization. She had no idea who the hell I really was. "He never told me about the Abraxas audit," she said quietly, trying to salvage something. "Or the board. Or anything. I didn't even know he." "Then maybe that's the problem," the CEO said. "You didn't ask." It was quiet for a moment. Wind moved through the tent flaps. You could hear the rattle of ice in the cocktail shaker from 50 feet away. And then he said it, the line that sealed the gravity of it all. "You didn't just insult a guest," he said. "You insulted the man whose silent nod is the reason you have a job. And now, every single person in that boardroom is wondering if you're too arrogant or too stupid to be trusted with influence." Her eyes flicked toward me. I didn't move, didn't look, didn't need to. Legacy doesn't defend itself in public. It just waits for the truth to echo louder than the lie. She took a step back, then another, like distance would somehow reverse the impact. But the air between us wasn't space anymore. It was a crater, a silent record of the opportunity she just lit on fire in front of the most powerful people she'd ever been in the same room with. And it was only beginning to burn. That evening, the sun dipped behind the tree line like it was trying to hide from the tension hanging over the estate. String lights flickered on. Music began to float from the patio speakers. Light jazz, the kind picked by someone who thought ambience meant ignore the growing crisis. I was in no rush. I lingered by the fireplace inside, nursing a single pour of Ardbeg and listening. Not to people, no. I let people talk. But I watched how they moved. Who stopped laughing? Who kept glancing at the library doors like they were expecting an earthquake? Then the invite came. A discreet nod from Michael, followed by a quick word to the event manager. The phrase was simple, but heavy. He's ready now. They led me down a short hallway, past a painting of a battleship I once helped prevent from being auctioned off during a hostile merger. Funny how these places collect artifacts without ever learning the stories behind them. The boardroom was warm, walnut-paneled, low-lit, old money scent in the air. Half the board was already there. The other half filed in behind me, shaking hands with that practiced, cautious grace reserved for those who know the pecking order but aren't sure where I sit in it. Michael stood up first. "It's been years, sir," he said, not a trace of irony in his voice. I shook his hand. No smiles, just recognition. One of the newer board members, a woman who took over a seat from a hedge fund that swallowed 3 divisions last year, tilted her head. "Would you reconsider an advisory role?" she asked. "We're restructuring our approach to intermodal. Your insight would." I raised a hand gently. "I'm just here for the weekend." The room nodded. Not a single objection. They knew exactly what that meant. Outside the boardroom, she was circling, pacing, trying to regain traction. She cornered the COO by the appetizer spread, a glass of red in one hand like a prop she didn't know what to do with. "Look," she began, "there's some confusion. He and we dated casually. It's not like I knew," he never said. The COO cut her off, folding his napkin with meticulous patience. Then he looked up at her with an expression that should have been framed and mounted in every MBA course titled How to Know You've Lost. "Then you made 2 grave errors," he said. "You insulted him, and you didn't know better." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. He continued. "We vet everyone. Advisors, vendors, even caterers. And you brought a man who could walk into any of our partners' boardrooms and clear the floor, and you didn't think to ask who he actually was." She tried to laugh. Deflect. "Okay, but that's not really fair. He doesn't exactly broadcast credentials. He didn't even tell me his last name for weeks." "That's not his job," the COO said flatly. "It was yours to figure out who you were dragging into our inner circle." By the time I walked back through the lounge an hour later, the music had shifted to something more somber. Less saxophone, more strings. Half the board had vanished, retired to late calls or private briefings. She stood near the garden doors, clutching her drink like a life preserver. Her eyes tracked me, then darted away the moment I looked in her direction. That was her first smart move all weekend. Someone walked past her, someone she'd been courting for months. Didn't stop, didn't nod, just walked. That's when she knew. She wasn't in the room anymore. Not in any way that mattered. The conversations that defined the next year of this company's future, they weren't happening over cocktails. They were happening behind glass doors she no longer had the key to. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely alone. Not the curated, "I'm just independent," alone she liked to brand herself with. The real kind. The kind that comes after you realize every ladder you climbed was built by someone you never bothered to thank. And one by one, the rungs were disappearing. The next morning broke like any other on a curated estate like this. Fresh linens, overpriced eggs, and the smell of coffee strong enough to pretend no one was hungover. But beneath the veneer of another productive retreat day lurked the scent of something else, reshuffling. The official schedule was posted in the main hall. Strategy panels, executive brunch, a branding breakout at noon. She was slotted for 9:30 a.m., prime slot, right after the CEO's vision remarks. She'd bragged about it 2 nights ago, called it a signal of growing trust. Only the room didn't feel like trust anymore. By 8 o'clock, I was seated on the patio with a cappuccino when one of the board members approached, cautiously, almost like he didn't want to admit he needed help. "We've got a problem," he said, sliding a thin folder across the table. "Valkyr Freight. Acquisition stalled. China's regulators are circling. We're burning goodwill and the internal model's garbage." I skimmed 3 pages, then pointed to a single line. "This," I said. "Reverse it. You're front-loading market assumptions instead of letting performance trend dictate positioning. Flip it. Lead with data, not ambition." He didn't even sit down, just nodded, snatched the file, and walked off like he was holding a live grenade someone finally showed him how to disarm. By 8:45, 2 more board members found reasons to coincidentally walk near the patio. One dropped a name, another dropped a file. By 9:10, the CEO himself came out, shook my hand again. Didn't say much. But he didn't need to. That's the luxury of legacy. Silence is a language. Inside, she was prepping. Alone. Her boss? Absent. Deliberately. She asked the assistant if he'd be joining her. The response: he's been pulled into a separate briefing. That briefing didn't exist. They just didn't want him standing beside her when she tanked. When she entered the room for her session, there were fewer smiles than usual. Less eye contact. Less of that polite energy executives used to flatter before watching someone fail. She stood behind the podium, laptop open, nails tapping against the case as she waited for the projector to catch. The lights dimmed. Slide 1, market share metrics. Slide 2, forecasting model. Slide 3, risk disclosures. And then, before she could even explain the heat map, Michael stood. "We'll review this later," he said flatly, not even looking at her. "We have other priorities this morning." She froze. You could hear the fan in her laptop spinning. That desperate little whir of a machine trying to keep from overheating. Her mouth opened, then closed. She stared at Michael, then another board member. No one met her eyes. She stepped away from the podium slowly, like maybe if she moved softly enough, she could exit the moment without anyone noticing. But they noticed. Everyone noticed. She was supposed to be the rising star. The fresh face. The vision with teeth, as one glossy article had once called her. Now, she looked like an intern giving her final capstone project to a room of men and women who already found someone else to trust. She walked back to her seat, but her chair wasn't where she left it. It had been nudged, slightly off-center. A physical metaphor so small, so unintentional, it wouldn't register with anyone else. But she noticed. Her hand trembled slightly as she tried to adjust it. And for the first time, the word optics slipped from her mouth not as strategy, but as fear. Outside the glass, I hadn't moved. Still sipping coffee. Still not part of any formal agenda. But inside, the structure was shifting. Not with announcements. Not with memos. With momentum. And every ounce of it was moving away from her. She locked the door behind her and ripped off her blazer like it was suffocating her. Her suite still smelled like lavender oil and fabric softener. Charming little comforts she'd requested ahead of the retreat. Nothing about the room matched her pulse now. The perfectly arranged welcome basket sat on the dresser, untouched. A bottle of red wine and 2 glasses still wrapped in tissue, meant for the post-presentation victory toast she had confidently planned. She threw her heels across the rug and paced barefoot in tight, frantic loops, her breath short, her fingers twitching at the screen of her phone. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't even registered what Michael said in the boardroom. Her mind had tunneled inward the second he stood up and cut her off like a failed pitch at a bad startup demo. All the work, the positioning, the strategy, it evaporated in under a minute. The shame was no longer abstract. It was physical. Her skin buzzed with it. She opened her contacts and scrolled. Her father's name appeared like a lifeline she hadn't needed in years. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Pumpkin. You all right?" "Dad," she whispered. Do you know someone named?" She paused, struggling even to say it. "Gregory Vale?" The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was devastated. A slow, exhaled breath filled the line. "Sweetheart," he said finally, voice heavy and almost hoarse. "You just insulted the man who saved our company in '09. Her mouth went dry. "He what?" "Gregory Vale isn't a man. He's a system. A shadow. A force. He turned the lights back on when we were 2 quarters from a total collapse. He stepped in without taking credit. Took a backroom seat, reorganized the debt, restructured the executive comp stack, and got us out clean, on a handshake. We offered him a board seat. He refused. Said, quote, 'You already have your uncle. He'll do fine.'" Her legs buckled. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed. "He doesn't do press," her father continued. "He doesn't do photos. Hell, half the people who know his name never even met him. But people owe him. Everyone owes him. I've seen senators defer to him in private conversations. Banks listen when he whispers. And you dismissed him like he was a valet." She closed her eyes, hand covering her mouth. Her father wasn't yelling. That made it worse. He was speaking with the kind of reverence she had never heard in his voice. Not for any man. Not even for her grandfather. "I thought he was just some—" She stopped. "He never told me who he was." "And why would he?" Her father replied coldly. "He never does. Because real influence doesn't need affirmation. He lets people show who they are. And you just showed him." Her eyes were burning now. The room suddenly felt too bright. Her brain replayed every conversation, every moment where she talked over me, corrected me in meetings, made passive digs in front of others like I was someone trying to ride her ascent. God, she even remembered mocking the worn jacket I wore to dinner once, called it weathered, like it was a liability. The man she thought was tagging along quietly, orbiting her world, he built it. She gripped the edge of the bed, knuckles white, and tried to steady her breathing. Her father said something else on the line, but she wasn't listening anymore. Her ears rang with the final nail. You didn't just ruin a relationship, he said, almost like an afterthought. You might have just destroyed your reputation. She dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't speak. She just sat there, knees to chest, surrounded by luxury she no longer felt welcome in. Everything she thought she knew, wrong. Everything she thought she controlled, gone. And the man who could have saved her from all of it was already halfway gone. By Sunday evening, the air had shifted. The retreat, once brimming with carefully engineered positivity and curated networking magic, had turned cold. Not overtly. On the surface, the charade still held. Smiles were exchanged. Hands shaken. A jazz quartet played something upbeat near the dock. But underneath it all, the energy had decayed. There was a perimeter around her now, unspoken, quiet, but firm. People still greeted her, but no one invited her into the next room. Conversations cut off just as she approached. Her name, once peppered into every strategic discussion, had gone quiet. Then came the message. A firm knock on her suite door. One of the assistants, stiff posture, eyes fixed at a point just above her shoulder, handed her a sealed envelope. Your stay's been extended by one night, the assistant said. There's a feedback session scheduled for 6:30 in room 14. She blinked. No one mentioned. The board added it this morning. The assistant replied before leaving, quickly. Inside the envelope was a printed agenda. It was short. A single page. 10 items. Item 7 stopped her breath. Advisor session, Gregory Vale. The letters looked like they'd been typed in stone. There was no context. No explanation. Just a name she could no longer look at without feeling sick. She dressed in silence. A navy blouse. No jewelry. Low heels. The kind of outfit she used to wear when she knew she'd be speaking in front of key people. Only this time, no one had asked her to speak. By the time she arrived, the hallway outside room 14 was mostly empty. The windows were dark with the reflection of string lights swaying from the outdoor canopy. She sat in one of the high-back chairs across from the door, legs crossed, holding the printed agenda like it might offer protection. At 6:31, the door opened. The CEO stepped out. He didn't smile, didn't ask her how she was doing, just handed her a second piece of paper, a shorter one. Before we begin, he said flatly, review this. It outlines concerns raised during the weekend. She scanned it quickly. Bullet points. Ambiguity. Terms like misjudgment, misrepresentation, reputational risk. Her throat tightened. She looked up. No one told me this was happening. He met her eyes, finally, and said, that's exactly the problem. Then he turned and stepped back into the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, just enough for her to hear murmured voices, but not enough to be part of the conversation. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to walk in or wait. Then the door shut. Soft. Decisive. She sat back down, clutching the paper. She didn't know whether it was worse to be left outside, or to know that inside, my name was on the agenda. I walked past her 10 minutes later. Not quickly, not slowly, just directly. I didn't look at her, didn't pause, didn't offer any gesture that might suggest familiarity, because there wasn't any anymore. We were no longer we. In fact, we probably never were. She turned her head to follow me, like if she could just catch my eyes, just explain, she could pull this back. But I didn't stop. I didn't say a word. And when the door shut behind me, that sound, the gentle, padded click, was louder than anything she'd heard all weekend. She sat outside for 30 more minutes. No one came to get her. No one offered an explanation. And when the door finally opened again, it wasn't for her. It was for someone else entirely. Another advisor the board had quietly flown in that morning. She wasn't being included. She was being replaced. And not with a bang. With a nod. A signature. A silent shift of chairs. Her name hadn't been pulled off the schedule. It had simply stopped meaning anything. 2 weeks later, the retreat was a distant blur of shame and unanswered questions. She hadn't spoken about it to anyone, not in detail. She returned home pretending nothing had happened, defaulting to her curated routine. Matcha in the morning, inbox 0 before 10, recycled affirmations pinned neatly on her fridge. But the silence didn't leave. It hung over her desk, her phone, her mirror. She kept checking Slack channels that had gone quiet. Watch meetings she once ran get reassigned without notice. She tried to convince herself that it was just post-retreat lull, that someone would reach out any day now. Then the mail came. A thick envelope. Certified. Hand-delivered by courier. No handwritten note. No accompanying call. Just the letterhead of the firm she once treated like her personal playground. Effective immediately, your strategic oversight privileges are suspended pending further review. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a warning. It was a freeze. The kind of freeze that signals the board isn't just uncomfortable. They're done pretending you belong. She stared at it for a full minute before opening the second letter. It was shorter, colder. This one was from her boss. We trusted your judgment, but your lack of due diligence reflects poorly on this firm. Until further notice, you are relieved of all client-facing responsibilities. No signature, just his name typed in Helvetica. Brutally professional. She read both letters 3 times. Once to understand, twice to accept. By the 4th read-through, her hands were shaking. Because now it was real. Not a cold shoulder. Not a boardroom snub. Not some awkward silence at a weekend brunch. This was professional exile. In black and white. She didn't cry. Not at first. She paced. She opened her laptop and typed a message to her assistant asking if there had been a mistake. But halfway through, she stopped. Deleted the draft. What could she say? She hadn't just misread the room. She'd misread the entire architecture of power. And I wasn't answering her texts. She checked her messages. 9 unread. None for me. That's when she picked up the phone. Scrolled to my name. Press call. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same. The 3rd time, her voice cracked on the first syllable of my name. She cleared her throat and spoke fast, as if rushing through the shame might somehow make it easier to forget. I didn't mean it. I didn't know. If I had known, her voice caught, and for the first time in a long time, she sounded human. Small. I thought you were just. I don't know what I thought. A pause. Then softer. I'm sorry. Click. She didn't know that I listened to the message. Twice. But I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. Not even because I wanted to hurt her. But because some mistakes don't need retribution. They just need to be seen. And she'd finally seen it. Every name she tried to impress. Every door she thought she'd walked through by charm alone. It had all come through me. My silence. My access. My presence. And now? Now she stood outside of it all, staring at closed doors that once opened without effort. Because access, once revoked, isn't always reinstated. Especially when the person holding the key never says a word. The ballroom was packed. High ceilings, gold-trimmed banners, corporate logos in elegant serif fonts. The annual summit was always a spectacle. A place where CEOs pretended to care about panels and ESG compliance while quietly sniffing for mergers and exits. I hadn't appeared publicly at one in over a decade. My name had drifted into lore, becoming more of a whisper than a resume. But this year, I was invited. Quietly. No announcement. No red carpet. Just a reserved seat on the left side of the stage, next to 3 people who'd once sat in my office begging for bridge capital they couldn't spell correctly on the paperwork. The lights dimmed after the final keynote. A moderator introduced the new initiative, a $400 million strategic fund targeting infrastructure efficiency and supply chain resilience across North America. The crowd murmured with interest. When the slide changed, my name appeared. No photo, no bio, just 3 words. Legacy Strategic Advisor, GV. The crowd didn't applaud, but the right people sat up straighter. They knew. Behind the curtain, there was a closed-door meeting with 7 board members and 2 government liaisons. I said very little, mostly nodded, clarified 1 clause, suggested 1 shift in the fund's milestone structure. It was enough. That evening, I left through the side exit. Didn't stay for the gala. Didn't need to. The press photo made the rounds by morning. There I was, in the corner of the stage, arms folded, listening to the final speaker. And in the background, blurred, near the edge of the frame, was her. Standing, not speaking, not invited on stage. Wearing a blazer that tried to look powerful, over a posture that had forgotten how to be. She wasn't listed in the release. Wasn't quoted in any summary. No one mentioned her name. She was simply present, the way wallpaper is. That night, the message came. Short, late, typed like a confession with no punctuation. Why didn't you warn me? I stared at it for a moment. There was no rage in me, no pride, just a dull, quiet truth that had been waiting to be said since the very beginning. I replied, you warned yourself. You just didn't listen. And then I turned off the phone. Not out of cruelty, out of peace. There was nothing left to explain. No revenge plotted. No plan executed. Her fall had been her own design, built slowly, carelessly, out of ego and assumption. All I ever did was stand still long enough for the truth to do what it always does. Echo louder than the lie.